As Phil mentioned a month ago, he would be teaching the first 4 weeks, and then he would hand that off to me for this month, and then I'm going to hand it off to Dan for May. So we're all taking our own turn at attempting these lessons for 1 Corinthians. And today is the fifth lesson in Corinthians, and it's Corinthians 7, 1 through 40, so basically the whole book. And the book entitles this Matters of Marriage, and I think that's kind of, it deals with marriage, but I think a better title for this one is Stay As You Are. And you'll see that as we go through this, that Paul repeats over and over again, stay as you are. And I think that's a better message to those who have no interest in marriage, maybe. But each one of us have our own style. Phil has his style. James has his style. James likes to start with quotes. I like to start with music, and that's because of Dick Tao. He got me wrapped up into that. I love it. So I typically will start with a song that I can find that has something to do with our lesson. Because I think music sets us in a tone and sets our mind to a point where we're ready to really understand what God's talking to us about. Phil also said that last week was for mature audiences only. Well, chapter 7 is even for more mature audiences than last week was. So you'll have to bear with me as we go through this. I'm not an expert in this. I'm just going to share with you some of the things that I know and have learned about this. When you read through the Bible, there are certain books that you enjoy reading more than others, I think. For me, Paul's not one of my favorite writers, okay? He's just not. That's just not my style of learning. We all have different styles of learning. Paul is very verbal. He goes into long, expanded sentences, running things together, and I have a hard time separating that out because I'm more of a mathematic mind, and so I like little chunks of pieces, kind of like James does it. And so I have a struggle with Paul. And I thought this was an interesting little clip here. And this is kind of how I feel when I read Paul.
Why? Why? Oh, that's why.
That's kind of how I feel sometimes when I read Paul. I have to go through him quite a few times. And so he can be a struggle for me. Maybe not for you, and that's fine because we all have our own styles of learning, just as we all have our own styles of teaching. 1 Corinthians 7, 1 through 5. Now concerning the matters about which you wrote, it is good for man not to have sexual relations with a woman. But because of temptation to sexual immorality, each man should have his own wife and each woman her own husband. The husband should give his wife her conjugal rights, and likewise the wife to her husband. For the wife does not have authority over her own body, but the husband does. Likewise, the husband does not have authority over his own body, but the wife does. Do not deprive one another, except perhaps by agreement for a limited time, that you may devote yourself to prayer. But then come together again so that Satan may not tempt you because of your lack of self-control. The word that he uses there, sexual relations, is not found in the original translation. The word is touch. So if you have King James, King James, Revised Standard, American Standard, they'll use the word touch. It is good that you do not touch a woman. It's kind of a euphemism that they're used to refer to sexual relations. We have a euphemism that we use too. You know what it is? Sleep with, okay? We're not talking about sleeping, right? When we say they slept together, we're not talking about rest, all right? It's a euphemism. And that's what Paul is using here, a euphemism that they touch. And so throughout Scripture, throughout the Bible, when the word touch is used like this, in this connotation, it means a sexual relationship. And so he's saying, he says, this is what you wrote to me. So Paul's quoting what they wrote to him. Prior to this chapter, the first 6 chapters was Paul dealing with issues and problems that he saw in the Corinth church, things that had been reported to him by other members such as Chloe, who'd said, these things are going on. And so he addressed those things. He says, you need to pay attention to these things. And so he addressed those. And the last thing he dealt with, which Phil dealt with last week, was immorality. Immorality. There seemed to be very many men visiting prostitutes. And he's saying, that's immoral. Don't do that. You're called to Christ. Don't bring your bodies into contact with him, because you become one with him. So he's very adamant. That's a bad thing. Don't do it. And then he immediately follows it with this chapter where he's saying, now, concerning the things that you wrote, the things that you wrote. And this is what they wrote. It is good for a man not to touch a woman or to have sexual relationships with a woman. It's good. What are they expecting from Paul? What are they expecting when they write that to him? Now it's a beautiful day outside. What's your response to that? Yeah, you're right, it is. It's a nice day. And isn't that what they're expecting Paul to say? He's just talked about sexual immorality, and now they're saying, obviously it's a good thing that we don't touch a woman, that there's no sexual contact with a woman. That's a good thing. Now, as a concession, not a command, I say this. I wish that you were all as myself, but each has his own gift from God, in one kind and one of another. This is what they were saying in their little statement to Paul. This is an ad lib, okay? This is what they're saying. Since you yourself are unmarried, Paul, and you're certainly not seeking marriage, and since you have denounced porneia or prostitution in your letter to us, is it not so that one is better off not to have sexual intercourse at all? After all, the new age which we have already entered by the Spirit, there is neither marrying or giving in marriage. Why should we not be as the angels now? Besides, since the body counts for nothing, if some wish to fulfill physical needs, there are always the prostitutes. Now, that little sentence didn't say all of that, but that's the intent of what these people were saying to Paul. Well, they're all about, the first century Corinthians are all about casting off moral restraint, okay? We saw that in Corinthians 6:12, where they're talking about, so that grace may greater abound, we can do whatever we want to so that grace takes care of that problem. And Paul says, no, you got that all wrong. That's not what grace is all about. And others were all about moral severity. In the line which are well known for philosophy, especially in this time in Greek culture, asceticism was very popular. What is that? What is asceticism? Being ascetic. I knew James would know. What is that?
Where you make vows of like poverty and abstinence, like monks and nuns do.
Okay.
Churches where they're trying to live very simple lives without any material possessions, any material desires.
Okay. It literally is a lifestyle characterized by abstinence, abstaining from things, okay? Worldly pleasures. It's about self-discipline, self-imposed poverty, simple living, spiritual goals, frugal lifestyle, material possessions are renounced, okay? It deals a lot with fasting and religion and prayer and meditation. And so the picture that Paul's painting for us is that you have this group of people who wrote to him saying, we're going to be aesthetic, okay? We're going to be this way because sex is a bad thing. Obviously, it's a bad thing because it's an earthly thing. And if it's an earthly thing, therefore it's a bad thing, so we're not going to do that. We're not going to do it, and we're not going to allow our husbands to do that. Now, you may think I'm picking on the women, but the way this letter is written, or this book is written, Paul is primarily directing this to the people who wrote the question, which sounds like women wrote this question, or this statement to Paul. Not the men, the women. And most of the commentators I read said they were eschatological women. Well, that's a nice big word. What does that even mean? What's an eschatological woman? They're focused on end times. They're focused on end of the world times. Everything coming to an end. Does Paul deal with that? Paul talks about that all the time. We're in the end of days. We're in the end. You and I are in the end days, right? There's been 3 dispensations. We're in the 3rd. There's no other dispensations after this one. Okay? There's the patriarchal, there's the Mosaical, and then the Christian. And after this, there is no more. There's only what? Only being with God, right? That's all that's left. And so these women, and probably some of the men, had got it in their mind that they wanted to be more holy. They wanted to be more spiritual. And so they're saying, you know what? It's good that you just don't even have sexual relations at all. Just don't have them. Where do you think this idea came from? How do you listen to Paul and then come up with this idea? Now, get that this is important, okay? This is an important issue because Paul addresses it, okay? He's going to spend a whole book, a whole chapter on this issue. So it's an important issue. We think, well, it's back then. It had to do with them, not us. Not true. It has to do with us too. Why would they ever come up with this idea? Yes, ma'am.
There's a prevailing idea that that which is spiritual is good and that which is fleshly or tangible is bad. And so anything that was physical was of less value or inferior.
Okay.
Soiled in some way.
Okay.
Supposed to be purely spiritual, only focused.
They had this idea, and again, it goes to kind of asceticism and into stoicism and some of these other issues. They believed that anything that was earthly was polluted. And the only thing pure was spiritual things. And so you should only dwell on the spiritual things, and anything earthly you should be abandoning yourself from. You should be eliminating them from your life. So that was part of it because they're in a Greek culture, okay? The culture they're in is Greek, and that is a prominent aspect of thinking for the Greeks. Yes, sir? Another good point. They were trying to earn salvation. We're going to be extra good and work our way to heaven. Okay, we're earning our way to heaven. What does Paul say about that? Grace. That's what he says. Grace. You can't earn your way to heaven. It's a gift. God gave it to us. And all we have to do is what? Accept it. That's it. We just have to accept it. Where else might this idea come from? Well, look at Paul himself. What do we know about him?
He lived a simple life.
He lived a what?
Simple life.
Not necessarily simple.
He was unmarried.
He was unmarried. And what did he say about himself? I am celibate. Okay? For those that don't know what that means, it means I don't have sex. I don't need it. It has no interest to me. That's what Paul believed. I'm not interested in it. And so looking at him, they might have said, well, okay, I get it. Paul doesn't do it, so we shouldn't have sex either. Because he's a very spiritual man. He's filled with the Spirit of God. Therefore, we ought to be like Paul. Any other reasons they might have felt like this? Okay, let's go on. So what's Paul's response to that idea? What did Paul say? This is what you say. This is what I say. What's Paul's response? Not this. No. His literal response is no. You got it all wrong. You've got this all wrong. Okay? So now we have to get everybody unbashful here. He said, if you're a woman, give your husband sex. If you're a man, give your wife sex. Why? That's the way God made you. That is what God intended of you. Okay? At the very beginning, he created man and woman, made them separate, made them so that they could become one. And what did he say? Go out and do what? Make babies, as Dan Fitzsimmons likes to say. Make babies. Now, what's interesting here, he never talks about making babies. There's only one point to sex here. What is it? Okay, it's to keep him from being tempted from sin, but also for what? For pleasure. God made sex pleasurable, all right? He made sex pleasurable. That's what it was. That's how he intended it. If it wasn't, we'd avoid it. Most of us avoid pain and things that aren't pleasant. We just, I don't want any of that, and walk away from it. But it is pleasant, and so that's how God made us. But he says, you do this to keep each other faithful. You give them what is their due. What does that mean, their due? Give them what is their due. They have a right to it, okay? They have a right to it. Well, why do they have a right to it? What gives them the right to say, I want sex with you, my wife? Husband, I want sex. What gives them that right? They entered into the marriage agreement. Paul goes on to say what, though, about it? Yes, ma'am. It's not your body. Hey, mister, it ain't your body. It's hers. And lady, it ain't your body. It's his. Paul justifies that you don't have a right to deny sex to your partner because it's not yours. It's theirs. Now, in this society today, those are fighting words, okay? Them's fighting words. You don't say that today, you know. Oh, no, women have their own rights. Men, you can't tell women what to do. Really? We live by God's law. Paul moves on from talking about just husbands and wives to another topic about marriage. He said to the unmarried and the widows, I say that's good for them to remain single, as I am. But if they cannot exercise self-control, they should marry, for it is better to marry than to burn with passion. Now, the with passion is added in newer translations. That's not what it says. It says it's better to marry than to burn. And so there's been discussion, is it burn in passion or is it burn in hell? Now, most scholars have pushed this concept that it's burn with passion. But in reality, it can be both. It could be both. Because if you're not exercising self-control, you're bound not for heaven, okay? He says that over and over again, that self-control is one of the godly gifts. And so it could be either. But it's interesting that he says the unmarried and the widows. Who are the unmarried? was on. I must have hit the switch. I pocketed the switch. Thank you, sir. I want to go back for a minute because he does say, Paul, throughout this book, will make concessions and exceptions, which is really interesting. There's not a lot of imperatives in this chapter where thou shalt nots. There's a lot of, in my opinions, in here. And he does make an exception back for the husband and wife. He says it is okay not to have sex together. When? When you agree to a brief period of prayer and fasting. What does that say if you agree? It's a mutual decision. The wife said, I want to have a session where we're not going to have sex anymore so I can pray. The husband says, nope. So you can't do it. According to what Paul's saying, nope, that's not allowed. You have to agree to it. And again, the whole purpose of it is to prevent sexual immorality, okay? To keep the men or the women from going outside the marriage to find sexual satisfaction. That's the whole point of what Paul's trying to say. Your sexual satisfaction is within the marriage, nowhere else, only there. And you do whatever you have to do together to make sure that that's fulfilled. That's what he's trying to explain here. And then he goes on and says the widows and the widowers, more than likely, widowers. He doesn't use that word. But given the context, it's probably where he's at. It's good that you remain single. What about the next three words?
As Paul is.
As I am, as Paul is. Again, who's he talking to? Those who have been married and have lost their spouse. How many of you think Paul was married at one point?
There is a theory that maybe his wife abandoned him when he became a Christian.
What's that?
I've heard theories that his wife might have abandoned him when he became a Christian.
Possibility that his wife might have abandoned him as a Christian, that she may have passed, already been passed, because that would make him a widower, okay? But what's interesting, and we pass over this a lot of times, and we sell Paul as strictly being single. He more than likely was married. Also because of his Jewish background. He was very high in the Jewish religion, and to be at that level, typically he would have to have been married, okay? Exactly.
Within the Pharisees, if he hadn't gotten married,
Exactly. If he had not gotten married, he would not have risen to the level that he had because it was a requirement of the Jews that at a certain age, you have to marry. It's not a choice. You do it. And so, more than likely,
grandmother and everybody will make sure to
yeah, everybody will shove you into it one way or the other. We'll find somebody for you. So, more than likely, Paul's married, or was married at some point. And now he says, I'm like you. I'm not married anymore because my spouse is gone. Okay, dead or whatever, but by reference, it's probably dead. But if you can't control yourself, you should marry. For it's better to marry than it is to burn. So Paul basically is saying, this isn't a rule, it's a what? Suggestion. Sometimes we use a different word. Yes, sir. Okay, common sense. It's his opinion, right? Now, let's get this so we don't get off on a tangent about opinions. Paul's opinion is a little different than my opinion, okay? Paul was completely filled with the Holy Spirit. I mean, I'm filled with the Holy Spirit, but not like Paul was, who could do miracles, who could raise from the dead. I mean, who could do stuff we just can't even imagine. He could do those things because he was filled with the Spirit, and God spoke through him. And so his opinion is pretty high. We should take it with a lot of, we should take it severely. So he's saying, you don't have to stay single, but I think it's a good thing. Basically, what he's saying is, stay as you are. Stay as you are. If you're single, if you're a widow or a widower, stay as you are. But if you can't because you have sexual urges, then go ahead and get married again. For verses 8 through 16, he divides it into 3 areas. It's a message to people who have been married but aren't now, to the married people, and then a message for people who are in kind of a tricky situation. They're married, but it's married to someone who is not a Christian. So he's going to address all of these. Now, he just addressed those who were married but aren't now. He says, it's best you stay that unmarried. But I'll make a concession. If you need to marry, go ahead. What should determine an unmarried Christian's choice about whether to marry? You're single. What should determine whether you get married or not? Yes, ma'am.
This is just a personal statement. My husband's mother, her husband passed away, and she was married like 2 months later. But she had a need to. They were at our house, and she was fixing her husband a sandwich. And she said, "You want so and so?" And she's fixing him a sandwich. And I'm like, but she needed that. She needed to be needed.
Okay.
He was a Christian, but she needed to be needed, and that was her. And they've been married almost 20 years now.
Okay.
It was like they came to my son's, but she came to my son's when she said, "It's gonna happen again, I'm not getting married." But she wanted, and actually the person she married, like I said, he's a Christian, he's been really good for her. But she got married at 19, her husband passed after like 4 years, and so it was a need for her to even be to serve somebody.
Okay. Paul said if you're burning in sexual desires, go ahead and get married. It's not the only thing that he's telling us here. And again, what's beautiful about this book or this particular chapter is there's a lot about pastoral judgment. He uses pastoral judgment throughout this whole thing, and is telling us that we have within Christ the ability to do pastoral judgment. Sometimes we don't want to be alone. It may not be about a sex at all. It's just, I don't want to be alone anymore. I need that companionship. I need that oneness with somebody else. Okay? I need to feel needed. I need to serve somebody. Those are all legitimate reasons, right? So what would determine whether you marry or not? Well, okay. Are we fulfilling a personal need? Are we fulfilling a personal need? Well, that's just not quite enough, but a personal need that's going to make me more spiritual. Is this going to make me a more spiritual person if I marry? That's really the question we should be asking, right? What else? What other should you consider?
John,
Yes, ma'am.
back in 7, it says, however, each man has his own gift from God.
Oh, let's go back to that. Each man has his own gift from God. By the way, I was just going to read you my notes. I only have 12 pages, but I thought, well, that probably wouldn't be fair. So he says, now as a concession, not a command, I say this. And the concession is that you can separate for a small amount of time if you mutually agree to it. Okay? You can do that if you mutually agree. And then he says, the reason that is, I wish that you were all like me, celibate. But each has his own gift from God. He's saying celibacy is a gift from God. Okay? Celibacy, in Paul's eyes, is a gift from God. It's a charisma. But he said, that's just one kind of gift. Sexual relations is another gift. In context, what he's saying is being celibate, it's a gift from God. Being sexual with your spouse is a gift from God. They're one and the same. as far as gift. One's not better than the other. So it's no better to be celibate than it is to be sexually active with your spouse. Yes, ma'am. Oh, we're going to get to that, Miss Marilyn. Marilyn says they should also be a Christian. We're going to get to that one because Paul is not going to be shy about that particular comment. To the married, I give this charge. Not I, but the Lord. The wife should not separate from her husband. But if she does, she should remain unmarried or else be reconciled to her husband, and the husband should not be divorced from the wife. Okay, moving on. Wait a minute. In our society, divorce is as easy to get as a big gulp at 7-Eleven, okay? But he's saying, no. I don't want you to get divorced. Is that what he says? I don't want you to get divorced. No, he actually does something totally different in this book, in this chapter, than he does anywhere else in this chapter. He says, who says that? I didn't say it. The Lord said it. The Lord said, you don't get a divorce. Ooh. Ooh. Well, where does he say that? I mean, I don't ever read that, do you? Where does he say that? Matthew 5 says it. Matthew 19 says it. Okay. Sorry, but what's that? Malachi said, it's all through Scripture. What's God's feeling about divorce? I hate it. Now, not to set anybody off. Yes, he hates it, but there are exceptions, and he will deal with those exceptions, okay? But here he's talking to a Christian couple. How do we know that? Because he's going to address non-Christian couples in a minute, or mixed couples in a minute. Here he's talking about Christian couples. He's saying if you're a Christian couple, you cannot divorce. I didn't say that. The Lord said it. Well, what if it's a horrible situation? Well, he says, here's a concession. You can separate. Does that mean divorce? No. Separate. Go your own way. Well, what if I want to be married? Then go back to your husband. Go back to your wife. That's really what he's saying. Now that sounds kind of harsh, okay, kind of hard. But the concept comes back to what marriage is all about, right? What is marriage? What is marriage? To become one, okay? So I don't like this arm anymore, so I'm going to divorce it. Right? I mean, it's the same thing because the husband and wife are one. So separating them, divorcing them is cutting them off from your life. Right? So Paul's saying, no, that's not right. You can't do that. In verse 10, Paul refers to a specific command of Jesus himself. This is Jesus saying it, presumably the one found in Mark 10:9 and similar passages like Matthew 9:19, 3 through 12. What sorts of behavior of a husband and wife help prevent this desire to divorce? How do we keep from wanting a divorce? Yes, ma'am. Communication. A lot. And women and men don't talk the same way. I'm always telling my wife, I don't talk like that. Sorry, I don't understand what you're saying. We talk different. We think different. What else besides communication, though? What's that? Fulfillment. Kindness. Respect. And what Paul's going to tell you is spirituality. Be spiritual with each other. Not just physical, but be spiritual with each other. Oops. To the rest I say, I, not the Lord. Again, this is God talking, not Paul, that if any brother has a wife who is an unbeliever, I say this, not the Lord. The Lord didn't comment on this. Paul's saying, he didn't deal with this situation. I have to deal with this situation. So here's my judgment on this. That if a brother has a wife who is an unbeliever and she consents to live with him, he should not divorce her. If any woman has a husband who's an unbeliever and he consents to live with her, she should not divorce him. For the unbelieving husband is made holy because of the wife, and the unbelieving wife is made holy because of her husband. Otherwise, your children would be unclean, but as it is, they are holy. But if the unbelieving partner separates, let it be so. In such cases, the brother or sister is not enslaved. God has called you to peace. For how do you know, wife, whether you will save your husband? Or how do you know, husband, whether you will save your wife? So he's dealing with married couples again, but it's a different situation now. The situation is that one's a Christian and one's not. And the implication here is that they became a Christian, one of them became a Christian after they were married. Would that cause any issues? It does. It causes many issues, okay? And so his call for peace, okay? Many issues. And so he's saying, in that case, if the unmarried or the unchristian spouse doesn't want to stay there, let him go. Now, what he doesn't answer, which is interesting, is, are they free to marry? He doesn't answer that question. He calls for pastoral judgment. Okay? Pastoral judgment is required for that. And I'm not going to make that judgment. I'm not a pastor. But he says, why should they stay married if they can? Don't leave him. Stay with him. Yeah, he's a heathen. Stay with him. Why? You might save him. And not only you might save him, but you might do what? You might make your children holy. What does that even mean? Make them holy. You can raise them as Christian. You can put in them godly things. Okay? You can put in young people godly things. Yeah, the husband or the wife may not be a Christian, but you are. And so you can make them holy, make them separated from the world by giving them godly things. And so for that very reason, don't separate. But if they choose to do so, then let them go for the sake of peace. In the early church, this happened all the time, okay? And it happens now. We see it happen oftentimes. And while here he may be permitting divorce, this is a person's opinion. This is N.T. Wright, by the way. While they here permitting divorce, if an unbelieving spouse wants to separate, Paul will urge in verse 39 and 2 Corinthians 6:14 that Christians should marry only Christians. 2 Corinthians 6:14. What does that talk about? Do you know? Not being in relation, not necessarily sexual, but not being in relation with non-Christians. Okay? That's basically what it says. But we avoid that. But Paul says it's important that Christians marry Christians. What would be the potential value of a believer choosing to remain with an unbelieving spouse? We talked a little bit about that. It can save the husband, right? It can lead him to salvation. You ever seen that? My mom married and was a Christian. She married an unbeliever. Strong Baptist. I remember when he was baptized into the church, into Christ. I remember that. I was like 6 years old. You know people the same way that have brought their unbelieving spouse to Christ through their lives and living with them. He goes on now to give a couple examples. Only each person can lead the life that the Lord has assigned to him and to which God has called him. And this is my rule for all churches. And then he uses two, and we're not going to read it all because it's a little bit. He uses two examples, one of them being circumcision and one of them being slavery. What's his idea about circumcision? How important was it for Christians to be circumcised? Not at all. He says it's worthless. Now, for Jews, and there was Jews in his congregation, okay, that was like heresy, right? Because that was something that goes all the way back to Abraham. You got to do that. But Paul said that was for them. We're a different people today. Christ doesn't require that. And so circumcision is of no value. So whether you're circumcised or you're not circumcised, who cares? And then he goes on to say slavery. If you're a slave, stay that way. Now, he's not saying don't elevate your spot, try and get to a better spot. He's saying be satisfied where you are. And if you're free, be satisfied with that. And so basically what he goes through saying in all of this, whatever condition each of you are called, remain with God. Stay that way. Don't think you have to change your social status or who you are or what you are just to become a Christian. Now, there are things we need to clean up in our lives, obviously. But he's saying stuff like being a slave, doesn't matter whether you're a slave or not, to be a Christian. You can still be a Christian. Yes, sir.
He's saying that whatever you do, stay focused.
Okay.
Focus is of God.
Okay. Stay as you are is stay focused on what really matters. What matters? That we belong to God, right? That we are Christians and that we belong to God. And that's what he's trying to say matter. When we wonder why Paul is talking about circumcision and slavery in the middle of the chapter of marriage and sex, he is using them to illustrate a larger point. Don't try and change your status you had when you became a Christian. Don't try and change that. You are what you are. What are some of the sudden impulsive changes we might make, okay, try to make in our lives once we become Christians? I thought on this for a while. One of the things I could think of was was people who became Christians who were in the military, who became convicted that that wasn't for them anymore. Okay? Well, this isn't for me. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to serve God's army and not the other army. Well, what was the problem with that? You made a commitment and a contract to serve. Fulfill your contract, basically. That's one thing I could think of. And I'm sure there's others that are out there. He then goes on to talk about the betrothed. What are the betrothed? Engaged. Those are a promise. Different society. Remember this is a different society than us. Betrothed there meant a lot different than just being engaged in our time. Okay. In some cases, and he talks about a spiritual marriage, that some betrothed lived together, not sexually, but shared facilities together. It was common in their time. But he goes on to say, should you get married or not? Again, it's just the whole concept again. Should you get married again? Or not? He says, I don't want you to have anxiety. Don't be anxious. The unmarried man is anxious about the things of the Lord, how to please the Lord. But the married man is anxious about world things, how to please his wife. What he warns us about is dividing our minds. Being married, our minds are divided. Like it or not, our minds are divided. Why? Because you have to consider the other person. You're not just thinking of yourself anymore. You're thinking about your other half. And he said that can affect your Christianity, and so you need to be aware of that. And that's what he goes into throughout this. And he's talking to the betrothed as well. He says, when you're thinking about getting married, consider that. You're not just going to be thinking about yourself anymore. You're going to be considering somebody else in their life as well. And he said one of the reasons is we're coming into some bad times, and class is basically over. I told you I had 11 pages of notes. So he's saying we're coming into some bad times, and so it may be, considering what's going on in the world right now, it might be a good idea not to marry. In my opinion, don't get married. But if you have to get married, and why would they get married? Why would they think they have to get married? Same theme throughout. Why? Sexual desire. Okay? Passion. If you have that, get married. That's what he's telling them. Yeah, I know, Jack. You're trying to cut my throat. Okay? So Christians do face difficult times in life, okay? And we have to make decisions. And oftentimes those difficult situations are made more difficult because we are married. And so he warns us about that and tells us that if you're making a decision to get married or not get married, something to consider. And then finally he says that a wife, let me go back to that real quick, that a wife is, where'd it go? Is bound to her husband as long as he lives. But if he dies, you're free to marry. Okay? In the Lord. He leaves a qualifier with that. You can remarry. It has to be in the Lord. So what is Paul telling the Corinthians? The married, the unmarried? Stay as you are. That's the message. Whatever condition you're in, whatever situation, stay as you are. All right? Thank you. We ran out of time. Sorry, Miss Jackie.